Donovan Mitchell goes back to Cleveland. Who expected that? Plus, how is the second apron now really impacting free agency now that we've seen it for a few days? And how for sale are the Celtics really? It's all right now on the Locked On NBA podcast.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, welcome back to the Locked On NBA podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Psyched to be back here for a Wednesday show. This is your regular Wednesday crew. I'm John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast. Find me on Twitter at John_Karalis.
And I'm Jake Madison, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast on Twitter at NOLA Jake. Yeah, welcome back, man. Feels like it's been longer than it has, but like the, speed of the NBA, things have moved.
Things have moved. My champagne buzz has worn off after the championship parade. I feel good. I'm ready. I'm ready to talk about the rest of the league today. Today's show, by the way, brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So go get your last-minute tickets at Game Time. We'll talk about the Celtics, the world champs, for sale. But how for sale? I have an alternate view that I'll share later on. The second apron, this new CBA era, is fascinating to me. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we got to talk about the thing that we didn't expect. And I don't know, maybe this second apron era plays into Donovan Mitchell returning to the Cleveland Cavaliers. 3 years, $150 million. That's a max contract extension for him in Cleveland. It's a player option for the final season. So 2 years and then the player option so they can figure things out. Basically, the Cavs are doing it. They're getting it back together. It's just under different leadership, but the same players. So you were saying right before we started recording, this is a big win for Cleveland.
Yeah, this is a huge win for them, right? Like this gives them a lot of long-term stability. There have been so much like smoke, noise, rumors about Donovan Mitchell wanting to go to New York or play for a bigger market or something like that, that like this is unequivocally like massive for them, to be perfectly honest. Like that had been behind the scenes going back to his time with the Utah Jazz. So to go to Cleveland where they haven't had the playoff success that you would think he would have wanted with them so far, to not just kind of jump ship or force a trade and instead re-sign an extension there. And of course they could trade him in the future. It's just massive, right? Like this is a big win for a small market team that needed something like that. And it was unexpected. And I'm happy for them, happy for their fans. And honestly, like this move to me makes sense. You said it when you were kind of prefacing everything, because now the question for them becomes not, do you keep Donovan Mitchell? It's what's next, right? Like what do they do next? And from what it sounds like is they're going to keep their core four guys of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen, 2 guards, 2 centers, essentially. And there's a little bit of redundancy there, and maybe you could shake things up. Maybe you could trade for a Brandon Ingram in New Orleans. I don't know, something like that. But it doesn't sound like they're going to do that. And I get it, right? You're bringing in a new head coach. You didn't have the success you wanted under JB Bickerstaff, but maybe a new voice, new ideas gets more out of this group. So it sounds like they're going to run it back with this. And this is usually kind of like the first step of what you do with something like this.
Yeah. So the relationship with Kobe Altman is a big deal here. Yeah. And that's something that you can't discount, where the front office is on the same page as the star player. And maybe the star player had something to do with the coach leaving and, Kenny Atkinson coming in. But look,
he most certainly was involved in like picking the head coach, right? Like has to be.
Right. You don't do it without him giving his seal of approval, and his seal of approval meant he was coming back to try to see this thing through. But there is a little urgency, right? The 2 years to get this done is not a lot of time, but things are going to be moving fast in this new CBA era, where a team that was on top 1 year could be at the bottom the next, right? The Celtics are the team that everybody's chasing. Philly loaded up, New York loaded up, and now the Cavs are trying to load up and basically reload. And the thought process has to be, you get one more year of the Celtics, and then maybe they have to start breaking things up because of the second apron. Let's take this 1 year. Maybe the Celtics have injuries. They were pretty healthy outside of Porzingis all year long, but maybe a couple of things go wrong for the Celtics, and there's an opportunity for one of these other East teams to make a push this year. And then if the Celtics have to break it up, that's year 2 under Atkinson, and that's where you make your, like, this is our year to be contenders.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I read this, right? Like, they're not committed to this group long term. They're just committed to this group of 4 guys right now. And the way I always look at it when you really need to shake up a team, right? It's easier to change head coach than it is to change a roster. Look at the Milwaukee Bucks this past season, going from Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers. They just needed to do something, and they weren't going to be able to trade that whole team away. So it's what you do. Like, there's like a triage here. Like, we're underperforming and we should be better. What's the first thing you do? You fire the head coach and you bring in a different head coach. So they just check that box off. They're at stage 1 of this. If it doesn't work, then you trade somebody else. And now you can do this throughout the regular season, right? Like, you could do that at the trade deadline and make a more dramatic move if you need to. You can do it next off season because you have time with Donovan Mitchell. So, like, they're kind of following the script, kind of following the process that I normally think you do in these situations. And I think those are the right moves to do, right? Like, they were good last year. They weren't a bad team. They had an incredible run at one point. That was a little weird because players were injured and all of that. And it kind of maybe gave you some insight into what they should do, what they shouldn't. But they were a top 4 seed. There's something to be said for that. They won 48 games. It's not like they were atrocious last season. And if you think they were underperforming, you get only then improved from 48 wins. Like, that's a pretty good position to be in, I think. And we'll talk more about it in the next segment. But yeah, that second apron is doing some work here.
Oh, it really is. It really is. And so, but Atkinson's going to be doing some work with this roster. And I think one of the underrated elements here is that they not only brought back Donovan Mitchell, but they didn't have to trade Darius Garland to retain Mitchell. And that's a big deal because they're going to have to figure out how those two work together.
I mean, that's a big thing, right? Like, we heard rumors, Darius Garland is represented by Rich Paul and Clutch, that if Donovan Mitchell re-signs, they may request a trade. Like, maybe they were trying to, that still might happen, right? Like, I still don't think this is, when we look back on this Cleveland Cavaliers team, say they make a deep playoff run, say they make the finals or win the finals, like, it's not going to be with this core group of 4 guys, I don't think, right? Like, I think ultimately there will be change coming to them. I just don't think they need to do it right now, and you may as well see what you have here. There still could be a shakeup coming. They traded for Donovan Mitchell in September, which I think is worth keeping in mind. I know the NBA is a deadline-driven league, so you think the draft, you think free agency of when moves get made, but like, moves could be made later too, I think. But I do think they're maybe trying to get out of it. It's very rare, right? Like, Rudy Gobert was traded that same summer and was traded around the draft, I think, or right after. So moves could still be made. We'll see what happens with Darius Garland, because to me, he's kind of the most likely guy to be shipped out of everything eventually.
Sure. But I mean, they haven't done it yet. And I think
they don't need to.
They don't need to. And I don't know that, like, they could say and they could push, but also I don't know what landing spots there are that the second apron will allow to happen. You know what I mean? Like, which of these teams that will take Garland, like, what's their offer? What does Cleveland take back? Where does that leave them financially? A lot of things are under consideration here. I think you go to Darius and Rich Paul and you say, look, we are putting Atkinson there to figure out how to use these two together. So we understand that you want to maybe be moved. Give us till the trade deadline to see that this is, unless I missed a rumor or something that he is definitely out before the season started. I feel like you can kind of talk to them and say, give us a little bit of time to see how this works together before we, like, under the new coach. Just give the new coach a little bit of time and then see if this is like a problem for you.
That's why you made the coaching change, right? Like that's why you made the coaching change, was basically to buy you more time with this group and see what's there. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like they don't need to do anything. They were good last year. They should be better this year, we think, with a new head coach that they think is going to elevate them. Like they're a team to really keep an eye on, because look, they could be good. They could make some significant changes. They seem to be one of those teams that if we're looking into next season, like, oh, a lot might hinge on what the Cavaliers do or who they are.
Yeah, and look, they can look at their playoff series with the Celtics, and like the Celtics lost 3 games in the playoffs, and one of them was to the Cavs, and they didn't have Jared Allen. And you can say, hey, maybe things would have been different with a full squad, and you don't want to get too caught up in that, but they have a reason to be optimistic. And like you said, the Cavs don't really pull a lot of free agents, and for a guy that could have left to say, you know what, I am sticking around, that alone is a big win for the Cavs. And now they can kind of, under a little bit of pressure, they can get to tweaking stuff and working through stuff, and still, look, they're a 4th seed. There's a real opportunity to be in the top of the East again. So, but that second apron, man, it is. I
have some thoughts on this. I'm excited for this next segment here.
Ooh, big market, small market view on the second apron and its impact on this free agency. That is all coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is last minute tickets. I know that as we now hit the summer, I get to go to a couple of Red Sox games if I feel like it, and I don't have to worry about planning ahead. I'll just open up my Game Time app. If I want to go at the last second, no problem. Game Ticket's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. You can get tickets faster and easier there, and prices on the Game Time app go down the closer you get to first pitch. So wait outside the park, get those tickets at a good price. Last minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, all of that stuff. You get flash deals that are exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or your event, and zone deals where you pick the section, Game Time picks the seats for you. You save a little extra money that way. You toggle the all-in pricing. There are no surprise fees when you check out. You get a panoramic view from your seat so you can see what you're going to see before you buy the ticket. And their lowest price guarantee will credit you 110% of the difference if you find those same tickets for less somewhere else. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKED, LOCKEDONNBA, the name of this podcast, for 20% off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Go check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube, on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. All the big shows, all the big talk, all the big conversations, for real conversations, not fake arguments, Jake, like you see on some other networks. Fake, contrived arguments, real stuff on Locked On Sports Today, and we make appearances every once in a while. Second apron is the big thing. People, apron talk is not generally
so sexy here.
It's like the sexiest thing ever. But man, this thing is going to be like, so my big market perspective at first was like, man, there's going to be a lot of regret with the second apron. And then as you start to see things work out, you're like, you know what? I think the league really is going to take these expensive teams, rip them apart, and the cheap teams are going to have to spend their money. And this new collective bargaining agreement is going to create the closest thing the NBA is going to get to NFL type of spending that you can get in an 82-game league that plays every day.
Yeah, look, I, as a small market person here, I dig this. This is kind of fun to see players getting broken up from some of these teams, right? We've been trending this way for a minute, where it's no longer like a 3 superstar team era, right? It's duos instead of triples, I think. And yes, we've been going that way for a little while, and this is more or less going to solidify it. You know, Paul George leaving, going to the 76ers, right? Klay Thompson leaving. As much as it sucks to see some of these longtime guys with their teams leave, this is good for the parity of the league, right? We've had a new champion every year for a while now. Like, that's really never happened in league history before. Like, this is a time where I think everyone can kind of go in and be fans of their team and be like, yeah, our team has a shot this year, unless, you're rooting for like the Wizards or Portland or something like that. But anyone that's trying to be competitive feels like it could be. Like, look at the Western Conference right now. I think OKC is the favorite. And then it's like a bunch of teams kind of in the mix. Maybe Dallas second. But after that, I think it's pretty wide open. And that's a good feeling, I think, when it comes to this sort of thing. And you mentioned it with the Celtics, and I'll get to that in a second here because I have a point to make about two teams in particular. Like, it's them, but in a year, is that team going to still look the same? And I'm not entirely sure that it is. It actually might. I do think, so while I think the parity is good and you can clearly see teams are worried about the restrictions it gives, you just can't outspend and be like, our owner has so much money, it doesn't matter. Because look, you basically can't add to your team when you're in that second apron. You can sign your own free agents, you can sign minimum guys, and you can sign draft picks. You basically can't trade anybody at that point, right? It becomes so difficult to do that. So it limits teams that are good from adding to them. But if you are the Celtics, you can re-sign your own guys and just lock them up as long as possible. And you've just got to know that those guys are going to be good. And when that era sunsets, that era is done. I do think some teams are overthinking it, particularly the Los Angeles Clippers. Losing Paul George for nothing, I think, was kind of dumb. And for them not wanting to give him an extra year because they were worried about the moves that they would be able to make 3-4 years in the future, I think is overthinking the second apron. Because you did not replace his production, you did not get better, and that team took a step back. And here's the thing. Yes, you have more flexibility if you're not in the second apron, but that doesn't necessarily overcome losing a star player like that or the talent that Paul George has. So great that the Clippers have more flexibility, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to bring in guys that equal the player that left. That's a team that I think I look at and go, yeah, no, they definitely overthought this and did this wrong. Whereas I look at some other teams and you're like, yeah, that's the correct thing to do.
So the Clippers, you might be right about them overthinking it, but they're also in a position where they couldn't do the good team thing or the team that loses the player thing where, oh, you're going to sign with Philly? All right, I tell you what, we'll do a sign and trade. How's that feel? Like, we'll sign and trade you there.
They could have done an extend and trade, but I think the goodwill got so burned there that he wanted to spite him a little bit, right? Like, he opted out of a player option.
Also, you can't do a sign and trade. Like, you get hard capped at the second apron with a sign and trade. So that type of deal for the Clippers, I'm looking at their cap sheet now. They are 18 million under the second apron, 19 million under the second apron, with moves still to make.
So I think hard capping freaks people out, but shouldn't, right? Like, the Pelicans are hard capped at the first apron, but if you look at like their roster, there was almost no way they were going to be able to get to that point anyway. I'm not looking at the Clippers cap sheet like you are. Was there a way, given the mechanisms they had, basically at that point, the taxpayer mid-level exception, to get to that point of the second apron? Should you have signed, extended traded Paul George or something like that? I think certain teams are going to be able to handle this better than others, right? Like, the Pelicans publicly said, like, we're not going to be a first apron team because they literally were going to make a deal that wouldn't let them be in there. And like, I don't know, that's fine. They weren't going to be there anyway.
Actually, and I'm still like trying to remember. It seems like they've actually used part of their mid-level exception here.
Yeah, they signed. I forget who they signed, but yeah, like they did, right? Like, there's almost no way they were going to
hard caps them. That they are hard capped at the first apron. So now they're hard capped at the first apron, which leaves them $8 million. So you can't take back. They couldn't take back. They literally could not take back money, Paul George's money. You know what I mean?
No, but you could have taken back like less. Like, it still would have been ways to improve the team. Like, sure, you couldn't have taken back more money or aggregated it.
It freaks them out enough where it's like, we can't do that. Because now mid-season, you're the Clippers. You've got Kawhi Leonard, you got James Harden, and mid-season, if you're
agree with that.
And you've got no way to add even a minimum deal, if you're right up against that hard cap, you're stuck. This is your team, and for a team that's injury riddled, you can't be stuck. And so the whole point of this is that the second apron, the new luxury tax, the new CBA rules, a team like the Clippers, they don't have the tools to say, oh, this guy's leaving. We can't lose him for nothing. Let's figure out some kind of way to make a deal where we can get something back. The Warriors, you let Clay go and you only take back 2 second-round picks. That's not equal value. You're letting guys are starting to walk away from teams or leave teams without their big equal value. This is just exactly what the league wants. And to the Celtics, they're running it back next year. They've re-signed, I think, 13 of 15 salaries.
Smart move. It was a smart move. Like, that's why I think they're insulated from it a little bit for like a year or two.
Bit.
A tiny bit, yeah.
But after next season, the 25-26 Celtics will cost $450 million with luxury taxes and all of that stuff. Maybe they say, we'll do it. We'll do it and we'll break even that year, or we'll lose a little bit of money this year because we're still going to try to win a championship and we'll be legends in Celtics history, and we can't pass that up. But that's 1 year under the most punitive. And at that point, everything goes out the window, and the following year, everything breaks up. Like the Bluesmobile falling apart when they get to the tax assessor's office.
Yeah, it's you and I have talked about this for like a year or two here. It was basically once Tatum signed that max deal that he was going to get, like the clock was ticking on this. It was basically once Jaylen Brown signed that max deal a year ago that the clock was ticking on this Celtics team. So like they're insulated from it because they've done well and they acquired these pieces, and they were probably anticipating this, to be perfectly honest with you. And a couple front offices you could see weren't. So eventually it'll be okay. Kristaps Porzingis is declining, or this other player is declining, right? Like that's the concern with the Celtics here of we can't just trade him because we're over the second apron and improve our team anymore. So at that point, do you just trade everyone and kind of start from the ground up? And that's the type of situation that I think they're going to find themselves in. That is just, when do those dudes start declining and who are those dudes? For a team like the Clippers, going back to that point, where I get what you're saying of like they wouldn't have flexibility mid-season. I think that flexibility is great, but not if you're a worse team than if you just had Paul George and no flexibility, right? Like that's kind of the way I look at it with that. You get what I'm saying with it?
I gotcha. But like, this is what the CBA is supposed to do.
It is. It's doing its job. I love it, man. Let's let everybody have a chance here.
It's supposed to make you say, we don't have a good option. And a team like the Clippers that's expensive and has been trying for a long time, it's supposed to be like, hey, I'm sorry, this is re-entry time, and you're breaking apart upon re-entry. That's you've run out of time. It puts an expiration on everybody. And on the other side, the salary floor rules, where you have to spend a certain amount of money
90%
by day one, not by the end of the year, day one, or you do not get your luxury tax distribution. That is making the free agents, like the Celtics locked everybody up. But if Derek White went to free agency next year, somebody would have been like, hey, how's 2 years, $80 million sound? Or some ridiculous number from a small market, the Bruce Brown type of thing, where they say, we're going to give you 2 years, short years, huge money, so we can get you, we can spend the money we need to spend. Congratulations, you benefit, you hit the lottery. Like, that's what this is supposed to do. And eventually that evens out. In 3-4 years, that all evens out. Everybody, the water that's up high and the water is down low starts to kind of come together. And in 4 or 5 years, but before they opt out, everybody's going to be teetering around the same thing. And we're not going to have teams way under the cap, and we're not going to have teams way over the cap. And everybody's going to be playing with equal money.
That salary floor that you mentioned is really underrated. Think about how lucky the 76ers were. If they don't get Paul George and they had all of that cap space, it basically vanishes in a couple of weeks and you wouldn't be able to do anything with that team. They got so lucky this offseason getting Paul George like that. If he re-signs with the Clippers, what do they do? Right? Like,
right.
What do they do?
Hey, Donovan Mitchell, did you try to snatch him from Cleveland before he re-signed?
But they'd have to give up assets for that. That's the thing, right? Like they had all this salary cap space and they basically have to spend it. It's not like you could go into the regular season with all of that space. Like you have to use it.
We can go on and on and on.
Yeah,
we
I
have
could do
to
this
stop
for like
talking
days.
about this. But like what we're seeing the beginnings. It's like the first raindrops of the hurricane. Like it's starting to get windy and it's starting to get damp. You know what I'm talking about down in New Orleans.
I've been through a whole bunch of those.
You're like, okay, here it comes. It's happening. It's happening. And the rules on both ends of the cap are making for some really interesting kind of outlier stuff this season, maybe next season, and we're going to start to see things even out. I came into this summer thinking they might regret this CBA, and all of a sudden I'm like, this might be just how it works. This might actually have worked exactly the way they wanted it to. So we'll see. Meanwhile, the Boston Celtics are for sale. Are they really, really for sale? We'll talk about that. We'll play a little game of real or fake when we come back. The Boston Celtics announced on Monday that the team is for sale, but they put it in a very weird way. The guys mentioned it on yesterday's podcast, but the wording to me says a lot. But before we get to the wording, before we get all into the weeds here on my take, let's play our favorite game.
Is this real or fake? Just ask John and Jake.
Real or fake, Jake Madison? The Boston Celtics are about to be owned by a super mega billionaire, Steve Ballmer-esque, that's going to change the landscape of the league.
So I'm going to say fake. I think he could be owned by an owner like that, right? Like they're going to fetch like a record number price in theory, right? Like they're valued at like 4.7 billion, but they'd probably sell for like 8-ish if it's like 100% of it or something along those lines, or that's what the valuation would be here. There's only so many people that can afford that number. There's not that many in the world that can just be like, here you go, right? Here's $8 billion. It's one thing for $1 billion. It's different for, 8 times that amount. So real of like someone could own it like that. Fake though, that I think it will change the landscape of the NBA because look, you can't outspend this CBA. Like that second apron has dramatically changed things, right? A year or two ago, you could have an owner like Matt Ishbia with the Suns who's like, yeah, I don't care. We're going to just keep being deep in the luxury tax and I'll pay $500 million for payroll this year. But now you can't do that when you can't actually improve your team and need to improve your team. So that limits these like super wealthy owners being like paradigm shifters, I think. Yeah,
I'm gonna say fake, but I have a different reason for it.
Yeah, you also had me like doubting what I was gonna say here because you've got some thoughts, and let's hear it.
I think they have a plan in place, which is it's not the sexiest stuff, but like the wording of the team, the wording of the team's release is the controlling family of the ownership group has decided to sell the team for estate and family planning purposes, for family planning considerations. So that means the Grossbecks, Wick Grossbeck, the face of the ownership group, and his dad, that's the controlling family, they're selling their stake for, estate and family planning. So it makes it seem like somebody's sick. Somebody's like getting their ducks in a row. Something's happening for people to be like, okay, we're getting everything in order. Okay. They also say they're going to sell a majority interest in 2024. They already know that somehow, or early 2025, with the balance closing in 2028. They already know that it's going to take 4 years and that Wick is going to stay on until 2028 as the governor. So they have a plan. They already know what's happening. And I think what's happening is the other owner, the other face of the ownership group, Steve Pagliuca, is going to get the rest of the ownership group together. They're going to spend 4 years kind of diverting playoff run income. They're going to divert all this explosion in TV revenue, and they're going to divert two expansion team fees that are going to be coming within 4 years. They're going to take that money and they're going to say, instead of everybody distributing it, they're going to say, hey, Wick, take this, and that's part of what we're going to owe you, and we'll raise the rest, maybe borrowing against the value of this team and saying, we're going to take this. We're going to borrow $1 billion, give it to you. Here's the other bit of the money. That's your stake, and we're going to buy up, even if we're going to take half of your stake. So now we're the majority owners, and you can go find a bidder for 25% of the team, and that person can pay whatever you want, and that's going to take 4 years, and we got it all set. So I don't think a big magnate is coming in. I don't think the Celtics are getting a new arena because of this. I don't think somebody like Bezos is going to come in and try to shake things up and say, hey, maybe I'm going to move this team or anything like that. We're not going to get anything like that. That's never going to happen.
Not going to move the Celtics.
They're not. But what I'm saying is none of the wild scenarios that people are going to be saying, the big $8 billion sale, that's not going to happen. It's going to be a smooth little transition to keeping the group that's already there. So I don't think the Celtics are for sale is the big sexy headline the way people think it is. I think it's just they've got a plan in place. The current owners are going to shift things around, and that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah, so you make a good point, because my initial reaction when I saw that was like, why do this now, and why not wait for the 2 expansion teams that are inevitably going to come through? And that's going to be, each of those teams is going to go for, you're just putting a new team that gets paid to the owners. It's going to be between $2 and $4 billion for each team, right? Potentially reaching $8 billion. Then that gets split between all 30 other NBA teams. That's like a ton of money. It's like $500 million or more coming to each NBA team. That's money you kind of want in your pocket. I don't know. I wouldn't sell till I got that. You and I have talked about that on the show too, that we thought we might see some owners selling after the expansion teams, where it's like, cool, that's just pure profit, right? Like, that's not operating or anything like that. You just put that in your pocket and can walk away and then sell your team for even more. And you probably have bidders lining up at that point who didn't get one of those expansion teams. So that was something that kind of surprised me. But I see what you're saying of just like, this money's coming in, here you go. And then we'll get a little bit more equity this time. And then we'll get you some other money. We'll take more equity then. And then we'll get you some more money. And now all of a sudden we're the majority owners of this team.
That's right. That's right. And so that's not sexy at all. It's not a sexy story at all. But the Celtics are for sale was like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, that's just right after they win the title, when you should be kind of like, I never want to sell, right? Like, this is like you're at the all-time high. And it's not like you need to sell after you win a title when the value's at an all-time high. These valuations are only going up for NBA teams going forward.
Yeah, and it's the Celtics. Like the Celtics, the Knicks, the Bulls, the Lakers, like they're not dropping in value. Like, those are always going to be super, super high in relation to the value of even if the Celtics value drops, it's because the value of every NBA team has dropped. And that applies to a handful of teams in the NBA. So that's that. That's my take on the Celtics. And
that's good insight
I
there.
think, there you go. All right. So that's it. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. On Wednesdays, it's me, John Karalis, at John _Karalis on Twitter. I host the Locked On Celtics podcast. I can talk.
I'm Jake Madison, at Nola Jake on Twitter, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast. I almost forgot what I hosted. Host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast.
Me is spreading. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Tune in tomorrow. We got Nick and Pat hosting tomorrow. That's always a fun show. So check it out. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're on that YouTube page. Make sure you're in that comment section. Let us know what you think about Donovan Mitchell. Let us know what you think about how the CBA is affecting things. Let us know what you think about the Celtics or whatever else. And I would love it if you share the podcast, spread the word, tell everybody they should be listening to and watching the Locked On NBA podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.